Great, Joshua. Thanks for joining me today. How's it going?
Doing great. Thanks,
Great,
Alex.
great. We're really happy to have you here to discuss your new book, New Tricks for Old Bureaucracies, and which you're a co-author, and also a little bit about being the executive director at ACES Mobility Coalition. If we could just start a little bit about yourself, for those who may not be familiar with you, can you talk a little bit about your background and kind of what led you to focus on innovation in the public sector?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an urban planner by training, but I've always been very interested in how we can make transportation work better for people, particularly in cities. And I've spent most of my career working on how we can make change and create better public transit systems. I started my career working at the New York MTA, kind of inside that organization, trying to provide new ideas for service and operations that could really improve things for customers. And I still do that now as a partner at InfraStrategies, working with transit agencies around the country on how they can make strategic improvements. But the opportunity to work at LA Metro directly in a transportation organization at the highest levels as Chief Innovation Officer under Phil Washington in 2015 was certainly a really exciting opportunity to promote change and try to help transform a city that is known for being car centric into something that is much more public transit and people friendly.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. How did you become involved with the Office of Extraordinary Innovation, and what was kind of the original vision, for the office itself?
Yeah, so at the time I was the president and CEO of the Eno Center for Transportation in Washington,
Hmm.
D.C., National Transportation Policy think tank. And one of the people on my board was Phil Washington, who was the CEO of the Regional Transportation District in Denver, Colorado at the time. And I kind of got the sense that Phil was thinking about taking the job at LA Metro. I started to talk to him about it. We were thinking along the same lines about really wanting to use this opportunity in Los Angeles at a time when they were about to pass a big ballot measure and make enormous infrastructure investments, that
Hmm.
this was a time to bring real change, both in project delivery, technology, and other innovations. So he came up with the idea of this Office of Extraordinary Innovation and brought me in to build that office. And I think the original vision, which very much wound up playing out, was that the office would be an incubator for new ideas within LA Metro. It would be a liaison to the academic community and think tank community and really get the best ideas possible, but also a liaison to the private sector to bring in new technologies and new project delivery methods from the private sector to bear at LA Metro as well. And so we had those assignments that included not just creating a new unsolicited proposal policy for private sector ideas, which we did do, but also strategic planning for the agency, thinking big picture, what is it we want to accomplish? And therefore, what are the new things, what are the innovations that we need to undertake in order to accomplish those goals?
And this was before both the Olympics and the World Cup were kind of awarded, correct?
It was just before that. I mean, we
Okay.
had the sense that the Olympics could come at the time. Actually, we thought it might come in 2024
Right.
to Los Angeles, and then it was decided not long after we got there that it would be 2028. But yeah, we definitely saw an opportunity to showcase Los Angeles in a number of ways, even then.
And during the time there at LA Metro and in the office, you guys helped kind of launch on-demand transit and really kind of were the first to really introduce the idea of congestion pricing, and how it may work. What lessons did those efforts kind of teach you about driving innovation in a large public transit agency?
Yeah, bringing on-demand transit to LA Metro at the time was certainly something that the agency wasn't used to, right? And
Hmm.
it took the rest of the agency by surprise. This had been a transportation agency that was largely formed to operate public transit, and mostly buses and then later rail. And the idea that they would offer some kind of first last mile service with some newfangled technology that was developed by tech people was a little foreign. So we had to do a tremendous amount of work internally to bring people around to this idea of using on-demand transit. Phil was not the hard part. Phil was
Right.
on board from day one, right? But it's the rest of the issue because you can't. One of the key lessons I think that's in this book about our time at Metro is you can't do any of this stuff alone, right? And you can come at it and say, hey, we've got this great idea. But if you don't have buy-in from all the different people within this 12,000 person agency that need to operationalize what it is you're recommending, it's really not going to go anywhere. And congestion pricing was a little bit different because LA Metro did have some form of congestion pricing with the express lanes that it
Oh,
operates.
correct. Yeah.
What we were trying to do is, which was more radical, was to price uh, streets or lanes that previously had been free, which is always a political challenge, right?
Right.
So in that case, we really had to work very carefully around the politics. It wasn't so much an internal opposition as the outside opposition, outside concern about it. But we were very strategic and thoughtful in how we picked that battle. And another lesson from the book is I always say, pick your battles and win them. That was a battle we thought was worth picking for sure because congestion pricing could be so transformative in Los Angeles and achieve so many goals. We just had to find the right time to move it forward, and we did.
Yeah. And those goals are being met in New York. I mean, just looking, I mean, with your experience, it seems like it's a successful model there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the truth about congestion pricing is that anytime it is implemented, people like it. There's never been a congestion pricing program that I'm aware of in the world where it was taken out after it was put in
Hmm.
because no one wants it out. Once it's in there, people are like, oh, this is so much better. Why would I not have this? And that's true in Stockholm, and that's true in London, and that's true in Singapore, and that's true in New York.
Right.
And if you tried to take congestion pricing out of New York, which some people have tried to do, including the President of the United States, you would find a lot of opposition to it because it has made life so much better. It has made public transit better. It's made biking and walking better. It's made the city work more effectively. So it's really just a political issue of getting people to be comfortable with change. And that's really what the Office of Extraordinary Innovation was all about helping people become accustomed to the pace of change and the idea that something different could be way better than the status quo.
Right. And my memory is a little foggy I mean, post COVID. So
Yeah,
forgive me, but
like
if I'm
everybody.
if I'm correct, this is around 2016 that we're talking, correct? With the office?
So the office was created in 2015, and
Okay.
then it was around 2018 to 2019 where we really started to push the congestion pricing idea.
Okay. And in your time there in LA Metro, what is kind of like your proudest success that you had as part of the office and in being part of the LA Metro team?
Well, I think that there's two that I would point to. I'm sorry you asked for one, but there's two that I think are
That's
really great
fine.
because one is very specific and another is big picture. So the specific one is the automated bus lane enforcement effort that we put forward. So
Hmm.
at the time, there are buses on the Wilshire Boulevard bus lane in particular, but just in general, we're often getting stuck behind cars that were illegally parked in bus lanes. And that kind of defeats the purpose of the bus lane, right? If you have a bus lane where people are illegally parking, you're not going to get buses through fast enough, and it's not going to attract the customers that you want to attract. So we had an unsolicited proposal that led to the idea of on-camera bus lane enforcement, which took several years of work to get through. First of all, it was illegal when it was proposed. We weren't actually permitted to do it, so we had to get a law
Right.
passed in Sacramento to be able to do it in the first place. But then once we got that law passed, we then went out with an RFP, and eventually it was procured. And now bus lane enforcement is on, automatic bus lane enforcement is happening all over LA, and not just with
Mhm.
Metro, but with other transit providers who are using that same contract. So that's a real difference maker that I feel very proud of. The other one is the big picture, which is the strategic plan, Vision 2028, which we
Hmm.
pushed through in 2018. And it really transformed the direction of the organization in a very meaningful way because it said we're not just a transit agency, we're not just a builder of infrastructure, we are taking responsibility for making mobility work in this county. And we're going to tell you exactly how we're going to do that, right? Including things like congestion pricing, including things like we're going to have on-demand transit, all that stuff. was in there. And by getting buy-in on the idea that we really owed it to the constituents of LA County to improve their mobility, not just to operate transit for the people who need it most, although that's certainly something we did, and not just to build the infrastructure projects that we promised, but that we wanted to see outcomes in terms of mobility, in terms of reducing the challenges people face when they're trying to get from one place to another. And I think that transformation affects this organization to this day and has led to many, many exciting initiatives.
I think I want to ask you what maybe what one of your setbacks and how that kind of helped shape things. But before we get to that, I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how the landscape in public transit changed that allowed the office to be successful and some of these ideas that come to fruition, which in an industry that was a little reticent to change prior. How did you make those kind of strides to get those changes made and to tackle new ideas, initiatives, innovation?
Yeah, so we have lots of lessons in the book related to that. I think, first of all, let's set the context for the time that this was happening, right? So 2015, 2016, you're seeing Uber and Lyft become ubiquitous in cities and in fact flooding the streets with
Mhm.
lots of low-priced options for people to have point-to-point travel in their own personal vehicle. That was a pretty big competitor and also something that was increasing congestion in cities. And all of us kind of thinking, hey, we want to figure out how we're going to bring in these new technologies for public transit. And that was really Phil Washington's vision. And that's where I was very excited. It's like, yeah, these are competitors and they are causing problems, but they also have technologies that we can harness for the purposes that we care about. And
Right.
so that's the context in which we're talking about. But the one of the lessons in the book that I articulate is make friends and collaborate because you have to the power of a good idea, it only goes so far, and you need to find people who are open to change. And look, every agency is going to have people who are very stuck in their ways and are saying, no, I'm not going to do anything different. I'm just going to keep my head down. I'm not going to cause trouble. I just want to keep this job and get my pension. Everybody's going to face that. But there are also, every agency also has people who feel like they have a responsibility to make change and to make things better and to not just take the path that's already been well traveled. And you find those people. And if you can find them in every department and every transit agency around the country. And when you find those people and you develop that network of allies, you can build support for new initiatives across the agency. And it took us a while to learn how to do that, but we had some really talented people in the office who knew how to do it. And that's one of the reasons we were successful.
Yeah. And so can you talk about a setback maybe that the office had, either that was disappointing or that kind of helped shape you, moving forward, how you guys tackled initiatives after that fact?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest setbacks was we were trying to get involved with fare payment. Fare payment is a pretty critical component of the customer experience. At the time that we got there, while TAP, the card that is used to access transit services in LA, while it was ubiquitous, it was still using kind of old technology, right? I mean, we've all been to uh, transit systems now that have open loop payment, right, where you can just use a
Hmm.
credit card to board and exit. And it's so easy and customer friendly. New York has it, San Francisco has it. A lot of places are now have. We wanted LA to get to that because it would have been much a big upgrade and also to get to being able to use your phone, right? Both of those things, just getting rid of cards and moving towards better technology. But what we found was that in this particular department at LA Metro, it was very challenging to find the allies who could overcome the barriers. There was just a tremendous amount of resistance to having us get involved. And that was coming from the top of that department. And so, one of the lessons we talk about in the book is that you have to recognize the impenetrable fiefdoms that may exist. And I said earlier that, hey, every department has allies, every department has people who want to make real change, and that can be true. But if the head of the department or the top executives in the department are saying no to everything, and you just can't win them over, and there's nothing you can do, you might have to move on. And that's part of, what I said earlier about picking your battles and winning them. You have to figure out where are the battles that I cannot win? Where are the fiefdoms that cannot be penetrated? And just move on. Because we spent a lot of time, we wasted, I think, a lot of time, effort, energy, limited resources trying to penetrate that particular fiefdom, trying to make change in that area, and it got us nowhere. And I think if I were to do this again, I would try to more quickly understand where I really could make change and where it just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah. I'm curious, was part of that fare payment issue kind of the partnership that LA Metro has with the sister cities, Long Beach Transit, Gardena, that sort of thing, kind of rustling up all of those transit agencies to get them under one umbrella?
Well, I certainly think that was the fear of that department, right? Is that they've
Okay.
done so much work to get all these disparate voices who all look at LA Metro as the big bad wolf, right? And they managed to get all these agencies on board, and they built this coalition, and they didn't want us to come in there and mess it up, right? And I'm sympathetic to that. I understand it. But we also felt like, hey, this is a really important part of the customer experience in the future of the agency. We want to do something here. So that was the tension that we got caught in.
Okay. And in the book, kind of focus on making change stick. What are the most common reasons? I think you've touched on them a little bit, but maybe if you want to expand a little bit on, the most common reasons innovative ideas stall in the public sector.
Yeah, I think the most common reason that I saw is that people have something called status quo bias, right?
Mm,
And status quo bias means that if you look at the future option, you're going to look at it more negatively than you look at the status quo, even though the status quo isn't achieving necessarily what you've articulated as your goals. So
right.
you can, and transit agencies around the country are facing this right now. Like a lot of transit agencies are facing fiscal cliffs. They're facing potential for operational cuts. They've got ridership that has not fully come back since the pandemic. All of those challenges, if you look at those and say, well, we're going to keep doing what we're doing, that's status quo bias because why would you keep doing what you're doing when it's not achieving the goals that you have? And so one of the biggest things that we kept running into is people would have a fear of trying a new thing because they had more to lose from trying the new thing, right? If you
Mm,
just stick with the status quo, it's very rare that someone's going to say to you, hey, you stuck with the status quo and things didn't work out. But if you try a new thing, then you're putting yourself on display and saying, oh, we're trying this new thing. And then when that doesn't work, people are going to point at you and say, oh, you're the problem. You tried this new thing. It's the same concept you see in football. I love this analogy. I don't know if you're a
okay.
football fan, but like, have you
Yep.
noticed that now coaches all go for it on fourth down and they didn't
Right.
used to? Right. Well, that's status quo bias. People are like, oh, it's safer to just punt. And then somebody did the numbers and pointed out that it was absurd to punt in most of those situations. And they started saying, okay, maybe we should go for it on fourth down. And they started to take that risk collectively. And that's why they were able to do it. If it had just been one coach doing it, and then he had made the decision to go for it on fourth down and lost over and over again, he would have been fired. But because all of them were doing it together, there was this collective idea of like, okay, this is something that we can now do and we can get away with, and it makes sense. The same thing is true in transit. When you have a collective authority within the agency to fail and to have the ability to fail, that's when innovation happens. And we did have that to a large degree because we had a leader in Phil Washington who was willing to accept that failure for us and to have our backs when things didn't go our way. And that's why our office was successful where it was.
Yeah. Well, Joshua, I appreciate your time. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk
Yeah.
about, how your time in the public sector is now kind of informing your work in the private sector with InfraStrategies.
Yeah, so a lot of the work we do with InfraStrategies now is helping other transit agencies that want to be innovative and develop new ideas and bring new ideas to bear. So one of the ways we do that is helping big transit agencies with their strategic plans, clearly defining what their goals and vision are so that they can come up with the initiatives that they believe will better achieve those. And those initiatives are usually things they're not already doing, because if they were
Mhm.
already doing them, they would be achieving those goals.
Right.
So we often come up with new ideas and new innovations for them, yeah, through the strategic planning process. But when we do it, and this is where it gets to lessons learned from the book, when we do it, we're not just coming in and saying, here's a good idea, you should do this, right? That wouldn't get anywhere. we're asking people within the agency, what do you think should happen? The people within the agency know what the changes are that should occur. And you ask them, what should happen? How do we better achieve these goals? What do you think we should be doing differently? And you get those ideas and you build support for those ideas throughout the agency with the larger public and with the board and the executives over time. And that becomes your strategic plan. So that's something that we do that often helps agencies that are looking to innovate. We also have done, smaller scale things where we've set up unsolicited proposal programs for people who want to try to get new ideas from the from the private sector. We've helped people who are interested in some of the innovative ideas we worked on, like congestion pricing and on-demand transit and others. So we do a lot of work with the agencies in this country that do want to change and do want to make a difference, and it's really exciting work.
Yeah. And taken from that 15 time when Office of Extraordinary Innovation started and now 10 years, I mean, a lot has changed in public transit.
Yeah.
How is the thought process in the industry change? Are you seeing a lot more people, leaders wanting to innovate and willing to take that risk?
I see that there are some leaders that do want to take risks and go forward. I think the problem that I've seen is that there are many political challenges that are magnified now post-pandemic that I think were not as big of an issue pre-pandemic, right?
Gotcha.
So the environment of where there was a willingness to fail and being a little more permissive about people trying new things has faded a little bit because the pandemic set people back a lot. And now they're really trying to struggle to like, hey, how do we even get back to where we were? And it's harder for people when they're in that kind of crisis to think about innovative ideas. And unfortunately, it really should be the opposite, right? You would
Right.
hope that crisis creates the opportunity for new innovations, creates the opportunity to say, hey, we got to try something new. And there are places like that. And that's typically who hires us, right? Is the places that are like that.
Right.
Um, Unfortunately, I do see too many transportation agencies that are still afraid to take those risks. And I'm hopeful that that can change, but it's going to take, I think, a little bit more of reality hitting people in the face before it does.
Yeah. And it's a fine line, right? I mean, because there are things that were adapted, real-time information, fare collection, as you touched on. These are things that are being picked up by a lot of transit agencies, not just the innovative ones. So they are actually making changes and seeing the benefits of those changes, which could essentially kind of make them more willing to innovate and kind of put their neck on the line a little bit, right?
That's a great point. Yeah, it is true that a lot of the things that 10 years ago we might have thought, well, transit agencies are slow to adopt them. No, well, now a lot of agencies have adopted them, and that is encouraging. And I think there has also been a shift towards a greater emphasis on customer experience across the industry, and that's really
Mhm.
positive. So you're right. There are agencies that are adopting these things. On-demand transit is another example. I mean, we were
Yeah.
among the first, but now that's almost everywhere. You see versions of on-demand transit at these agencies. So it's always, though, the thing is that the pace of change always needs to be accelerated
Right.
because the industry itself is very risk averse. And when there's a crisis, when there's a real challenge as we're facing now, it needs to be accelerated even more urgently. So that's why we sometimes take for granted, like, yeah, they have made a lot of progress because so much more progress remains to be had.
Right. And you also are the executive director at ACES Mobility Coalition. Can you talk a little bit about how that role is kind of building on the work you did at Metro, particularly around scaling a new mobility solution that's a great solution for the right kind of operation, right?
Yeah, so as we discussed, a lot of the work I did at LA Metro was connecting innovative private sector technologies to public transit. And that's essentially what the ACES Mobility Coalition does. It stands for Autonomous, Connected, Electric, and Shared. And the idea is that public transit can be working with autonomous, shared, and connected mobility providers to help bring people to and from public transit And we need a specific focus on that to be successful. And so we are pushing in Washington for more flexibility in using federal capital funds to develop these partnerships because these really are capital expenses. So that's one
Mhm.
example of the work that we're doing. But we're also just bringing these different groups together to connect the public agencies that do want to try to experiment with these partnerships and the private mobility providers that can help do it. So it's very much similar to the work that I did at LA Metro because it is again bringing public and private together to accomplish larger public policy goals. It's also similar to the work I did at Eno because it's
Mhm.
essentially a nonprofit. And so part of my job is just managing the day-to-day efforts of this nonprofit that's trying to both influence policy and bring people together.
And those automated vehicles, they're made in America now, right? So the main manufacturers.
Well, so we are not a coalition of manufacturers. We're the
Right.
coalition of the
Okay.
software providers typically. But
Gotcha.
yes, the Buy America provisions certainly apply to this field, and we have to figure out how to work within those to make these partnerships happen.
Great. Joshua, again, thanks for your time. I guess maybe my last question, getting back to the book and for transit leaders trying to innovate today, I think we touched on it and we've also kind of danced around a little bit of the current climate politically. But what practical advice does your book give that is most immediately applicable in the current political and funding environment?
Well, as far as the political environment, you know, there's a lot of focus on the national political environment. I get
Mm,
frustrated by this all the time. Like the LA Times front page is telling me all the national news that I already knew
right.
from 15 other news outlets by the time it comes to me. And meanwhile, the local stuff that really matters, I mean, LA County, we're talking about a county of 10 million people. It's larger than 40 states. And a metro is an organization with a $9.5 billion budget. Like those are decisions that really matter at the local level. And the local politics is where I think the most interesting things are happening. And I don't think that the local politics are immune from the national challenges, but they certainly have the opportunity to make real change in the local level if you have the right leaders in place. So I
Right.
think we shouldn't despair about that. What we should do is be involved and care about local politics because it affects our daily lives. On the funding side, I think I look at what's happening in Chicago right now and I get very excited about the possibilities because what Chicago is doing is it's saying, yeah, we need more funding, but we also need to reform how we operate and the governance structure that we have that controls the regional transportation system. And both of those things should happen. I think it's a mistake to pour more money into a system before you make the system work effectively. And a lot of transportation agencies focus so much on, oh, well, how are we going to get our next funding round? Because they want to survive and their mission is critical and it's important and they want to make sure that they continue their mission. But it's also important to focus on the changes that need to happen, both in governance and institutions and how the agency is structured and the strategy that they're employing, all those changes should be happening at the same time that you're asking for more funding or trying to get after more funding. And I think that will help the transportation and transit agencies be more successful.
Great. Joshua, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us and hope to hear more about InfraStrategies and your impact on the industry soon.
All right. Thanks, Alex. I appreciate you having me on.